All right, let's talk about typography. Now, unless you're like me and you can't order a meal at a restaurant without first completely analyzing the fonts on the menu, I realized that understanding the difference between a serif font and a sans-serif font and all of the vocabulary that comes with studying typography is most likely boring to you. I also realized that trying to sum up the entirety of typography in one short video is completely impractical. So let me give you the BLITZ version of typography, and then I'll provide some resources attached to this lecture for those of you who would like to learn more. But the goal here is to give you a quick and dirty overview of typography. Typography is one of the most important subjects for you to understand as a graphic designer, and I realize I think I've said that about a dozen other topics that are the most important, but really typography is critical, and like all disciplines within art and design, it has a broad vocabulary associated with it. So because this list is so broad, we're going to touch on the main points of interest, introduce you to some key terms, and then give a few examples of effective ways to use fonts. Let's just dive in with some key terms to get started. It's about to get real nerdy, so just hang on and stick with me, okay? First up, let's take a look at the definition of a font. A font is a specific set of typographic characters that are designed to work together. So by characters, I mean the letters A through Z, 0 through 9, and all the other punctuation marks and even special characters like the copyright symbol and the ampersand and the dollar sign, just to name a few. Fonts are also called typefaces. Individual fonts are usually part of a font family, which contain variations of that font, such as bold, italic, condensed, and regular. Fonts can be separated into many different categories or classifications, such as sans-serif, serif, slab serif, script, black letter, mono, hand, and decorative. Now, most fonts can be separated into one of those two categories, either serif or sans-serif. Serifs are literally the little strokes or the decorations, the flourishes at the ends of the strokes of each letter. An example of a serif font could be something like Times New Roman. Sans-serif does not have those details or flourishes. They're a much more modern font. An example of that would be something like Arial or Helvetica. All right, let's take a step back. Why is this important? How does this matter? Why do you even care about this? Well, coming back to your job or our job as a graphic designer, it's important to master the art of communication. And typefaces literally give voice to our words. And again, who cares? Well, if you can understand the different feelings and connotations of each font, you'll be able to select the appropriate font and give the right voice to your project. You can evoke different emotions simply with the font you choose. For example, a serif font, again, something like Times New Roman. However, I wouldn't use Times New Roman because it's overused, but again, just something that you're probably familiar with. A font like Times New Roman, which is a serif font, has been around nearly since the beginning of time. Even back when tablets were literally carved out of stone, right, they used more of a serif font. Sans-serif fonts give a much more modern feeling, one of youth. If you want to have a feeling of being reliable or trusted or well established, then use a good serif font. Consider something like Baskerville Oldface or similar. If you want to give the feeling of being modern, clean, or trendy, then you could use fonts such as Calibri or Century Gothic or a handful of other sans-serif fonts. We've only scratched the surface with typography, but in the interest of keeping this lesson in BLITZ format, I'm going to wrap it up. I realize that some of you might go on to learn a lot more, and for others, this might be all you learn. So let me just leave you with a few rules to follow that'll help you as you continue to study graphic design. All right, so in no particular order, number 1, never use more than 3 fonts in your design. Ideally, keep it just to 2. By limiting your design to 2 fonts, no more than 3, you'll be able to have a more cohesive design. Because of this limitation, pick a font that has a deep font family with weights such as regular, bold, light, maybe italic, or condensed. This will help give you options as you design your layout, but everything will still feel like it belongs together without having too much noise. Number 2, always have a distinct hierarchy of text in your design. Make sure your headlines stand out from your subheads and that your subheads differ in size from your body copy. Your design should have a clear structure and a clear flow from beginning to end. Number 3, your font size for general body copy should typically be between 8 to 12 points if it's in print, and 14 to 24 pixels if you're on the web. Obviously, there are exceptions to this rule. For example, when I design business cards, the addresses and phone numbers can be as small as 6-point font. But again, that really depends on what font you're using, whether it prints well, and again, what each piece needs. So we're talking just your typical body copy. We want to make sure it's legible and that people can read it. Number 4, never use these fonts: Papyrus, Impact, Courier, Bradley Hand, Comic Sans, Trajan, Times New Roman, Mistral, or Stencil. There are a handful of other fonts you probably shouldn't use either, but the reason why I've pointed these fonts out is not because they're bad, but because they're so overused and misused that it'll immediately give you away as a rookie designer. They become more and more popular because of their availability. Operating systems like Windows have provided default fonts for the user, which is great because it removes the hassle of choosing and downloading your fonts, but it's also bad because now these fonts have been overused everywhere you look, especially Papyrus. Look at nearly any organic grocery store or massage therapist or church, and you'll probably see Papyrus in use. Again, these fonts aren't bad, it's just that they've been so overused that it'll make your design look very cliche. Hence, they are to be avoided. So you might be thinking, well great, now what fonts am I supposed to use? Well, I'm glad you asked. Don't be satisfied with the fonts currently on your computer. There are a ton of resources. So look and look and look until you find the right font that suits your project. I realize as some of you are starting out, you won't be able to afford purchasing a font, so there are some great resources and freebies such as defont.com, Google Fonts, Lost Type, and Font Squirrel. There's also a handful of markets where you can actually pay to use their fonts, such as creativemarket.com. I hope you've learned a lot in this lesson, and I realize it was just a short overview. There's so much more to learn about typography, and I really do hope you take advantage of the resources attached to this lecture. So be sure to download those and bookmark those for later, and then we'll dive into the next section.